They've surrounded us. Human, Sar whispered, trembling, looking at the circle of soldiers armed with monster bones. Good, Riv smirked, his eyes cold. Now I don't have to aim anymore. The crimson sunset reflected on the blood-stained dust, heralding a night of life and death. Each footstep of the enemy echoed like a final sentence for the two bound captives. The planet Morvek Prime in the outer return system was famous for its metal deserts and eternal dust storms. The red sky resulted from toxic gas residue and ore dust, always concealing a few rays of aggressive sunlight. Pincer Tactical Center, a guerrilla civilization worshipping war. Weapons made from indigenous monster bones. Dark magic tied to tribal beliefs. Sar, captain of the Alliance Exploration Force, a genetically modified human with blue skin, metal scars. Close combat tactics expert. Tied in battered armor. Status helmet damaged. She had just awakened on hot sand. Riv Harrow, Earth's ballistic engineer. Slender, but with eyes sparkling calculation. Recognized as an eccentric strategist who once saved the team from a bomb crater on Cathera Prime. They were taken prisoner by the Pincer Brigade warriors, with dark blue skin, black glowing tribal tattoos, wielding large bone spears, carrying the scent of burning and tribal drums. Time, year, 2487, F.S. Alliance Force Standard, when humans had reached the threshold of interstellar travel. Location, the outer belt of the Morvek Sistema conflict zone between the Alliance Coalition and the wild Pincer tribes. Earth time zone, afternoon to evening tactical planning, when dust storms combined with red rays created a stifling atmosphere. Disadvantageous for prisoners. Pincer, a militaristic society, divided into tribes, life and death beliefs tightly bound to rituals of sacrificing animal bones. Each tribesperson was trained in a Cathar tactical discipline, passed down by ancestors. Humanity, the Alliance of the Outer Rim, sought to establish research outposts, but continuously conflicted with Pincer over valuable Morsite resources for energy technology. From the storm's edge, Sar and Riv's exploration team was ambushed by a Pincer patrol formation, captured neatly. They were bound in bone cages beside a hill of sun-dried monster bones, the scent of dead souls' residue dwelling in the encouraging fractures. The chieftain of Pincer appeared, a giant blue butcher, wearing a reptilian monster skull on his shoulder, goosebumps carved with mystical shapes. He ordered his soldiers to prepare the death duel, a ritual, forcing two prisoners to kill each other to prove absolute loyalty. Sar, despite being severely injured, broken ribs, shattered armor, remained tense, maintaining a soldier's consciousness. If they want to witness a warrior sacrificing honor, I will not bow my head. Riv smiled mysteriously, tapping his fingers on the cage frame, as if measuring the guard's footsteps. He had just admitted to being in those days of thoroughly observing every Pincer habit. When the chieftain signaled, the two prisoners were dragged into the bone arena, a circular depression in the ground, surrounded by naturally cut rock seats for the tribe. The conflict arose. Sar had to face killing a newly acquainted teammate, Riv, or witness a savage death under bone spears. Meanwhile, Riv signaled to Sar, "Don't act hastily." The atmosphere tensed to the peak, tribal drums reverberating, flames flickering, black sand tinged red around them, promising a brutal death. 5 days earlier, Riv was transported to the Pincer prison camp, riskily crawling out of the cage at night. Bone Shrine observation scene. Riv examined indigenous bone clusters carved with characters, inscriptions calling ancestral spirits. He realized each bone cluster created a spiritual effect, forcing Pincer soldiers to bow. He used a metal shell fragment to carve several symbols, creating blasphemy that would terrify warriors when illuminated by a torch. 3 days earlier, he collected broken energy cell pieces from a crashed transport ship near ancient Ash Hill, crafting a thin, vibrational explosive device attached to the cliff wall where Pincer planned to build their tactical platform. 2 days earlier, Riv adjusted an old bone horn taken from offerings, recarved the sound chamber, shifting the frequency from monster repellent to predator call. He counted the jailer's footsteps, 47, 32, 18, to determine guard shift times and the perfect time zone to emit the sound. In the bone cage, Sar silently calculated the moment guards changed shifts. She suppressed pain from broken ribs, trying to analyze carvings around the cage. These symbols aren't natural. Sar discovered a small gap where the rope had frayed fibers, but she doubted. Simply attempting escape. They'll spear me first. Sar and Riv whispered through the bone bars. Sar questioned Riv's strange attitude. Why did you say to wait until the final second? He just shrugged. Accepting fear of death has never helped survival. For 2 consecutive days and nights, Pincer gathered new recruits around the bone cage. They learned tactical cultural lessons with the tomb score, destruction cult's drumbeat. They struggled while maintaining rigid discipline. Sunset before the fighting day. Riv secretly unpacked his acoustic impact device, hidden in his clothes. He used a soon-to-be synthesized toxic bacteria from monster carcasses, called predator musk, to attract Spidra ursus, spider bears, apex predators on Morvek Prime. Sar continued observing the guard formation, recognizing they moved in practiced assassin patterns. Exactly 47 steps. Pause 32 seconds. Walk 18 steps. She predicted tonight would have 3 shift changes. The second, around 2 a.m. Sar struggled internally, terribly afraid imagining being forced to kill a teammate, but also angry, seeing Riv sitting there with a cold smile. Riv revealed more about his past. 5 years ago, Cathera Prime. My teammates didn't survive. Now I've come to repay the debt. Sar suddenly realized Riv wasn't foolish. He had a greater objective beyond personal survival. Dawn. The Pincer Brigade began erecting the arena, arranging the bone throne, war altar at the center. Sar secretly placed a metal piece under the cage wall, creating the smallest opportunity to possibly pop the bone lock. Riv, accidentally, dropped a specially carved bone piece aimed at evoking Pincer beliefs, making them fear ancestral curses. As Pincer warriors gathered, Sar heard Riv quietly checking that the acoustic device was ready. Tension peaked when the chieftain stepped onto the war altar and read the sentence. Choose the victor, one dies. The survivor returns to the bone cage. Riv's machinery activated, vibrating slightly, causing the ground to shake. A small scream infiltrating between battle drums, signaling the coming chaos. Riv blew into the bone horn adjusted to altered frequency, emitting distorted sounds resembling Pincer ancestral calls, but actually a bait sound for Spidra ursus. Simultaneously, the device attached to the cliff face projected resonating signals, cracking the rock behind the war altar. Northern Unit, topside. Seeing blasphemous symbols in the bone cage when firelight from the war altar flashed down, they fell into religious panic. They screamed, broke formation, killing each other believing the gods had abandoned them. Western Unit, landing. Ran exactly to the position where Riv had installed the sound mines. The ground beneath their feet overturned, many cracks swallowing them. They tumbled, losing formation structure, weapons scattering. Southern Unit, main path opening. Spidra ursus monsters chased into the already dense formation, tearing apart bone spears, ripping Pincer people from behind. The battle now only left Sar with a blunt sword in hand, struggling against the giant chieftain. When the chieftain roared, raising his bone spear high, Sar blocked it but remained defensive. The sound of breaking rock behind echoed like thunder, signaling the war altar wall was about to collapse. Decisive moment. Sar seized the opportunity, using all her strength to strike the chieftain's side. When the enemy fell, the earthquake from the rock face released, completely destroying the war altar, burying most of the remaining Pincer soldiers. Many remaining Pincer warriors struggled in chaos, casualties reaching 80%. Survivors fled in disarray, dropping weapons, disregarding collapsed religion. Sar struggled to support Riv. He was also hit by a flying rock fragment, but still maintained his cold smile. They surrounded us to finish us. Now, they've buried themselves in their own mad worship. The Alliance rebel guerrillas, who had been monitoring developments from afar, flew in with their spacecraft. They infiltrated the battle crater, rescuing Sar and Riv. Before leaving, they returned to the scene. War-altar ashes flying with the wind, broken bone cage. The erring species self-destructed. On the rescue ship, Sar looked at Riv's personal stretcher, wondering, is the secret in your plan safe for any human society? She felt both admiration and horror at such sophisticated destructive power. The gorilla ship hung suspended in the red dust of Morvek Prime. Below, ashes spread across the battle crater, disguising all traces that Pincer ever existed. Sar and Riv's gazes met in the enclosed compartment. For the first time, she saw not his cold, calculating look, but a glance of hope. Sar. She abandoned some of her rigid, valiant warrior ideology, acknowledging that strategic intelligence is also a form of heroism. The heavy pressure dissipated, replaced by determination to learn to build peace instead. Riv. From an emotionless engineer who only knew how to mark enemies, he began to recognize the value of people and limits of killing tactics. His eyes revealed a spark of humanity, hoping to genuinely befriend Sar. The ship departed Morvek Prime, heading toward the Alliance Center. Sar and Riv turned back to look at the ash-filled red planet, wondering, is the strategic power R wielded the ultimate tool for peace or proof of disaster when misapplied? What future for Morvek Prime, re-establishing Pincer on new foundations, or prolonged dissolution? Finally, Sar placed her hand on Riv's shoulder, gently reminding, we have a long road ahead. We must find a way to turn this power into hope, not just destruction. They've surrounded us. Human, Sar whispered, trembling, looking at the circle of soldiers armed with monster bones. Good, Riv smirked, his eyes cold. Now I don't have to aim anymore. The crimson sunset reflected on the blood-stained dust, heralding a night of life and death to come. Each footstep of the enemy echoed like a final sentence for the two bound captives. Planet Morvek Prime existed within the outer return system, renowned for its metal deserts and perpetual dust storms. The sky burned crimson from toxic gas residue and ore dust, occasionally pierced by fierce rays of sunlight breaking through the haze. At the heart of this harsh world stood the Pincer Tactical Center, a civilization of guerrilla warriors who worshipped war itself. Their weapons, crafted from the bones of indigenous monsters, carried dark magic intertwined with tribal faiths, passed down through generations. Captain Sar of the Alliance Exploration Force knelt in the dust, her blue-tinged, genetically modified skin covered in fresh cuts alongside the metallic scars of previous enhancements. As a close combat specialist, she'd survived countless encounters, but now found herself imprisoned in battered armor. Her status helmet cracked and useless. Consciousness had only recently returned as she felt the burning sand beneath her knees. Beside her knelt Riv Harrow, the Earthborn ballistics engineer whose slender frame belied his importance. His eyes constantly moved, calculating distances, angles, and possibilities even now. The team records identified him as an eccentric strategist, the man who had once guided them all from the Death Crater on Cathera Prime when Command believed no escape possible. Their captors, the Pincer Brigade, moved with military precision around them. Each warrior's dark blue skin bore intricate tribal tattoos that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They carried massive bone spears harvested from creatures Sar couldn't identify, and the air around them carried the scent of ritualistic burning and the distant rhythm of tribal drums. The year was 2487 by Alliance Force standard dating, an era when humanity had firmly established itself among the stars, but continued to encounter civilizations that defied their understanding. Here, in the outer belt of the Morvex system, the Alliance's expansion constantly clashed with pincer territorial claims. This particular time, late tactical planning hours when dust storms mingled with the red sunlight, created the most oppressive atmosphere for prisoners. The air felt thick, almost impossible to breathe, and the temperature fluctuated wildly between scorching and freezing as dust clouds passed overhead. Pincer society operated on strictly militaristic principles, divided into tribal units whose life and death philosophies centered on bone sacrifice rituals. From birth, each member underwent training in a specific Cathar tactical discipline combat methodologies supposedly passed directly from ancestors through blood memory. The Alliance of the Outer Rim had originally established contact, hoping to create research outposts on Morvek Prime. But negotiations quickly deteriorated into conflict. Both sides coveted the rare morsite deposits that dotted the planet's surface, the pincers for religious purposes, the Alliance for advanced energy technology development. Their exploration team had been moving cautiously through an area known locally as the Storm's Edge, when pincer patrol formations ambushed them from 3 directions simultaneously. The attack had been perfectly executed, suggesting inside knowledge of Alliance protocols. Within minutes, Sar found herself and Riv captured, separated from their team, and imprisoned in what the pincers called bone cages prison cells, constructed from the massive skeletal remains of native creatures. The cages sat adjacent to a hill comprised entirely of sun-bleached monster bones, each piece intricately carved with symbols. The air carried a peculiar scent that Sar's training identified as biological decay. But something else lingered, almost as though the residual essence of dead souls had taken physical form. A hush fell over the gathered warriors as their chieftain approached. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his blue skin darker than the others, covered in scarification that formed patterns Sar couldn't decipher. A massive reptilian monster skull rested on his left shoulder, seemingly fused to his armor. When he spoke, his voice carried across the assembly without effort. "Prepare the death duel," he commanded, gesturing toward the prisoners. The guards around them murmured excitedly. Sar understood enough of their language to recognize the ritual 2 prisoners forced to fight to the death, the survivor supposedly earning the right to serve the tribe. In reality, she knew, survivors simply faced a slower execution after proving their willingness to betray their own. Despite her injuries, at least 2 broken ribs, and numerous lacerations beneath her shattered armor, Sar maintained her soldier's composure. "If they want to witness a warrior sacrifice honor," she whispered to herself, "I will not give them the satisfaction." Beside her, Riv tapped his fingers rhythmically against the bone cage, seemingly measuring the footsteps of the guards. When he caught her looking, he smiled slightly. "I've had time to observe their patterns," he murmured. "Every pincer moves to the beat of their war drums, even when no music plays." At the chieftain's signal, guards dragged them from the cages toward what appeared to be a natural depression in the landscape, a circular pit surrounded by stone ledges that formed natural seating for spectators. The Bone Arena, as Sar had heard it called in intelligence briefings, where the tribe witnessed executions disguised as combat. The conflict crystallized in Sar's mind. Either kill Riv, a teammate she barely knew, but who served the same alliance, or face certain death by ritual sacrifice. Neither option offered true survival, only momentary delay of the inevitable. As they were positioned on opposite sides of the arena, Riv caught her eye and subtly signaled with his hand. "Wait. Don't move hastily." The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as tribal drums began to pound a hypnotic rhythm. Torches flared around the arena's perimeter, casting dancing shadows across the black sand that seemed increasingly stained with red, whether from previous deaths or simply the light. Sar couldn't determine. Either way, It promised nothing but brutality to come. 5 days earlier, Riv had arrived at this same camp under different circumstances, transported as cargo rather than a prisoner. He had been stored in a temporary holding cage while the pincers prepared for a ceremonial exchange. During the night hours, when guard presence diminished, he had carefully maneuvered through the loosened cage bars, deliberately sabotaged during transport, and begun his reconnaissance. His first discovery came at what the pincers called the Bone Shrine, where elaborately carved indigenous bones stood arranged in precise patterns. Each cluster featured inscriptions that appeared to call upon ancestral spirits for guidance and protection. Through careful observation, Riv noticed that whenever pincer guards approached certain bone formations, they involuntarily lowered their heads in reverence. Understanding dawned as he studied the patterns more closely. The bone carvings created a specific optical illusion that triggered deep psychological responses in the pincers, likely conditioned from childhood. Using a metal fragment from his hidden toolkit, Riv carefully etched several counter-symbols onto inconspicuous bones, creating what would effectively function as religious blasphemy. When illuminated by torchlight at the correct angle, these markings would trigger fear responses in any pincer soldier who observed them. 3 days before the scheduled duel, Riv located the wreckage of a supply transport that had crashed near what locals called the Ancient Ash Hill. From the debris, he salvaged fragments of energy cells and transmission equipment. Working through the night in his cage, he fashioned a thin, vibrational explosive device, not powerful enough to cause massive structural damage, but precisely calibrated to create resonance patterns through rock. He attached this device to the cliff face where pincer leadership planned to construct their observation platform for the arena event. 2 days prior to their scheduled execution, Riv managed to acquire an old ceremonial bone horn from the offering table near his cage. Under pretense of examining it with reverence, he subtly modified the sound chamber, adjusting the acoustic resonance to shift from its original purpose of repelling native predators to instead mimicking their mating calls. With meticulous attention, he counted the jailer's patrol pattern: 47 steps forward, 32-second pause, 18 steps in rotation, establishing the precise timing of guard changes and identifying the optimal moment for deploying his acoustic weapon. Meanwhile, within her bone cage, Sar conducted her own assessment of their predicament. Between waves of pain from her broken ribs, she calculated the intervals between guard rotations, noting that the pincers maintained rigidly precise timing in all their movements. She studied the carvings surrounding her prison, recognizing that the patterns seemed deliberately engineered rather than purely decorative. "These symbols, they aren't naturally occurring patterns," she whispered to herself. "They're designed to create specific psychological effects." Through careful examination, she discovered a small gap in the cage construction where the binding rope showed signs of stress. The fibers had begun to fray, potentially offering an escape route. Yet, she remained cautious. "Simply attempting escape would be suicide," she concluded. "They'd spear me before I cleared the perimeter." During the quiet hours between guard rotations, Sar and Riv whispered through the bone bars, separating their cages. "Why did you tell me to wait until the final moment?" she questioned, suspicious of his unusual calmness in the face of certain death. Riv merely shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Accepting the fear of death has never actually helped anyone survive," he replied enigmatically. "Better to focus on the patterns that surround us. Everything here happens for a reason, follows a rhythm." Over the next 2 days and nights, Sar observed the pincers, gathering new recruits around the bone cages. The younger warriors received instruction in what appeared to be cultural indoctrination, accompanied by rhythmic drumming that the older warriors called the tomb score, apparently associated with their destruction cult. The recruits seemed to struggle between natural reactions and the rigid discipline demanded by their trainers. As sunset approached on the day before their scheduled combat, Riv carefully unpacked his acoustic device, concealing it within the folds of his tattered clothing. From a hidden compartment in his boot heel, he retrieved a small vial containing what he called predator musk, a synthetic version of pheromones derived from monster carcasses, specifically designed to attract Spidra ursus, the spider bear hybrids that served as apex predators throughout Morvek Prime's wilderness regions. Sar continued her observation of the guard formations, noting how they moved in precisely choreographed patterns that resembled the stealth kill training sequences from Alliance assassination protocols. Every patrol followed exactly 47 steps forward, paused for 32 seconds, then moved 18 steps in rotation before beginning again. Based on this pattern, she calculated that tonight would feature 3 major shift changes, with the second occurring approximately 2 hours after midnight, potentially their best opportunity for action. As darkness settled over the camp, Sar struggled with mounting internal conflict. The prospect of being forced to kill Riv, even in self-defense, filled her with dread. Yet she also felt anger rising when she observed his apparent detachment, sitting calmly, occasionally smiling as though privy to some private joke, while death approached them both. 5 years ago on Cathara Prime, Riv suddenly whispered, breaking her from her thoughts. My teammates didn't survive the ambush. Everyone assumed I escaped through luck. But it wasn't luck. It was calculation. His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. I've come to repay that debt. What happens tomorrow isn't about survival. It's about justice. Sar suddenly realized that Riv's behavior didn't stem from foolishness or denial. He operated with purpose, beyond immediate self-preservation. Whatever plan he had constructed, it served objectives larger than their individual survival. As dawn broke across the horizon, the Pincer Brigade began constructing the arena for combat. Warriors erected the massive bone throne called the War Altar at the center of the depression, arranging ceremonial sigils around its base, taking advantage of the activity. Sar secretly positioned a metal fragment she had pried from her armor beneath the edge of her cage, creating the smallest possibility of forcing the bone lock mechanism should opportunity arise. Meanwhile, Riv, accidentally, dropped a specially carved bone fragment near the guard path, one inscribed with symbols designed to evoke pincer superstitions regarding ancestral curses. As intended, the guard who discovered it reacted with visible discomfort, quickly showing it to his superior before both hurried away to consult with religious authorities. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as pincer warriors gathered around the arena in full ceremonial armor. From her position, Sar could hear Riv quietly testing his acoustic device, ensuring it remained functional after days of concealment. Tension reached its peak when the chieftain ascended the war altar, raising his ceremonial staff to silence the assembly before pronouncing judgment. Choose your victor, he proclaimed in the formal language of ritual. One shall perish in glory, the other shall return to the bone cage to contemplate the mercy of our ancestors. As he spoke, Riv's hidden device activated, sending subtle vibrations through the ground beneath the assembly, a nearly imperceptible tremor beneath the pounding war drums, heralding the chaos soon to unfold. Riv blew into the modified bone horn, producing a distorted sound that mimicked ancient pincer ancestral calls, while simultaneously emitting frequencies that humans couldn't detect but would draw Spidra ursus from kilometers away. The warriors nearest him hesitated, suddenly uncertain about the familiar, yet somehow wrong sound emanating from their sacred instrument. Simultaneously, the device he had attached to the cliff face activated, projecting resonating signals designed to exploit natural fault lines in the rock behind the war altar. Hairline fractures began spreading through the stone, initially invisible but growing with each passing moment. The northern unit of pincer warriors, positioned on the elevated section of the arena, suddenly noticed the blasphemous symbols Riv had carved days earlier, now illuminated by firelight reflecting from the war altar. As their cultural conditioning took hold, Panic erupted among their ranks. Warriors began shouting about ancestral abandonment, some turning their weapons on comrades they suddenly perceived as defiled. Their formation dissolved into chaos as religious terror overrode military discipline. The Western unit, rushing to restore order, ran directly into the area where Riv had calibrated his sound mines to maximum effect. The ground beneath their feet seemed to liquefy as vibrations reached critical frequency, creating sudden sinkholes that swallowed warriors mid-stride. Those who avoided falling lost their weapons and formation integrity, rendering them combat ineffective. From the south, attracted by the specific frequencies of Riv's modified horn, came the Spidra ursus, massive eight-limbed predators, whose chitinous exoskeletons could withstand direct hits from standard Alliance weaponry. They charged into the already disorganized pincer southern defensive line, massive claws shredding through bone armor and flesh with equal ease. In the center of this erupting chaos, Sar found herself armed with only a ceremonial blunt sword, facing the enraged chieftain who had descended from his now crumbling altar. Despite his massive size advantage, she maintained defensive posture, remembering her close combat training. When he roared and raised his bone spear high, she blocked the downward strike, but remained unable to counter effectively. Behind them, the sound of fracturing rock grew louder, signaling the imminent collapse of the cliff face supporting the war altar. Seizing her moment when the chieftain slightly overextended his thrust, Sar committed fully to a diagonal strike against his exposed side. As her blade found purchase between armor plates, the earth trembled beneath them. The chieftain fell to his knees just as the earthquake from the destabilized rock face reached critical mass, completely destroying the war altar and burying most of the remaining pincer warriors beneath tons of stone and ancestral bones. In the aftermath, surviving pincer warriors struggled through the chaos, their casualties approaching 80% of their fighting force. Those still capable of movement abandoned weapons and fled in all directions, their religious foundations shattered, along with their physical structures. The carefully maintained tribal order had collapsed entirely, leaving only confusion and terror. Sar, barely standing herself, managed to help support Riv, who had sustained a shoulder injury from flying rock fragments. Despite his pain, he maintained that same cold smile she had found so disconcerting earlier. "They surrounded us intending to execute us," he noted with clinical detachment. "Now, they've buried themselves in their own mad devotion to patterns they never truly understood." The Alliance Rebel Guerrilla Unit, which had been monitoring developments from beyond pincer detection range, seized the opportunity created by the chaos. Their lightweight stealth craft descended through the dust clouds, landing at the edge of the devastated arena. Combat specialists moved efficiently through the wreckage, locating and extracting Sar and Riv, while deploying perimeter defenses against potential counterattack. Before boarding the extraction vessel, they surveyed the battlefield one final time. The war altar lay in ruins, its ashes carried away by the perpetual winds. The bone cages had shattered, releasing any remaining prisoners. The once mighty pincer brigade had effectively self-destructed through the exploitation of their own rigid beliefs and patterns. Aboard the rescue ship, Sar watched medical personnel attending to Riv's injuries. Despite everything they had survived together, she found herself wondering about the implications of his methods. "Is the strategic approach you deployed safe for any human society?" she questioned silently. "What happens when such devastating insight turns against those it should protect?" Her feelings remained conflicted, profound admiration for his tactical brilliance, mixed with deep unease at how completely he had orchestrated the destruction of an entire cultural system. The guerrilla vessel hovered momentarily above the red dust clouds of Morvek Prime. Below them, ash continued spreading across the battle crater, effectively erasing all evidence that the pincer had ever controlled this territory. Years of Alliance military efforts had failed to achieve what Riv had accomplished in 5 days of careful observation and targeted intervention. Within the ship's medical compartment, Sar and Riv's gazes met briefly. For the first time since their capture, she saw something beyond cold calculation in his eyes, a flicker of what appeared to be hope, perhaps even connection. The shared experience of survival had created a bond neither had anticipated. The experience had transformed them both in subtle but profound ways. Sar found herself questioning the rigid warrior code that had defined her military career. She recognized that strategic intelligence could prove as heroic as direct combat, that victory sometimes required adaptation rather than mere strength. The overwhelming pressure she had carried as a combat specialist began to dissipate, replaced by determination to learn approaches that might build peace rather than perpetuate conflict. Riv, likewise, showed signs of change. From the emotionless engineer who had viewed opponents merely as variables in an equation, he began acknowledging the human dimensions of conflict. His eyes now revealed occasional sparks of empathy, suggesting a desire to forge genuine connection with Sar beyond their shared ordeal. Perhaps witnessing the total collapse of Pincer society had demonstrated the limits of pure tactical thinking divorced from moral consideration. As the ship departed Morvek Prime's atmosphere, heading toward Alliance Central Command, both turned to watch the red planet receding behind them. The sight prompted unspoken questions that would require time to address. Had Riv's strategic approach revealed the ultimate path to lasting peace? Or did it demonstrate the catastrophic potential of applying such methods without ethical constraints? What future awaited Morvek Prime now? Would surviving pincers eventually reconstitute their society on new foundations? Or would this defeat lead to permanent dissolution of their cultural identity? Finally, Sar placed her hand briefly on Riv's uninjured shoulder, breaking the silence with quiet determination. "We have a long road ahead," she said. "We must find ways to transform this power into hope rather than mere destruction." He nodded, his calculating eyes now tempered with something resembling wisdom. "Patterns exist to be understood," he replied, "not merely exploited." For the first time since she had known him, his smile contained warmth rather than cold precision. The ship accelerated into the darkness between stars, carrying them toward uncertain futures and the possibility of redemption. 5 days earlier, when the Alliance transport had first approached Morvek Prime's dusty atmosphere, Riv Harrow had already formulated the essentials of his strategy. The mission briefing identified the situation as a standard exchange negotiation alliance technology for safe passage rights through pincer territory. Riv, however, recognized the telltale signs of an ambush in preparation. The communication patterns don't align with their previous diplomatic exchanges, he had explained to skeptical mission commanders. They're creating deliberate gaps in their defense grid, not weaknesses, but funnels designed to concentrate our approach vectors. When his warnings went unheeded, he initiated contingency protocols. Using his engineering clearance, he modified the cargo manifest to include several unmarked containers, each filled with specialized equipment that would register as inert materials on standard pincer scanning technology. "If they take me," he instructed the communications officer privately, "maintain standard recovery protocols but delay implementation by exactly 120 hours. I need time to understand their patterns." The ambush unfolded precisely as he had predicted. Pincer forces struck from concealed positions, overwhelming the Alliance diplomatic team with surprising coordination. Most personnel were executed immediately standard pincer procedure for what they considered territorial violations. Only Riv and a few others were captured alive, marked for ceremonial death in accordance with their religious practices. From the moment of his capture, Riv began cataloging every detail of pincer behavior. He noted the rhythmic patterns in their speech, the precise geometric arrangements of their encampments, the ritualistic movements that accompanied even their most mundane activities. Everything followed patterns that could be analyzed, predicted, and ultimately exploited. His first night in captivity, he observed the guards' rotation schedule. Each warrior moved with mechanical precision, following paths that formed perfect geometric patterns when mapped mentally. Their ceremonial bone armor created distinctive sounds when they moved, sounds that revealed their positions, even in darkness. 47 forward steps, he whispered to himself, counting silently. 32 seconds of observation, 18 steps in rotation. Repeat. The pattern never varied by more than half a second, evidence of lifelong conditioning, reinforced by severe consequences for deviation. This rigid adherence to pattern would become their critical vulnerability. During his second day, while being transferred between holding areas, Riv studied the bone shrine constructions that dotted the pincer encampment. Each structure featured intricate carvings that seemed to serve both decorative and functional purposes. The symbols created optical patterns that pincer warriors responded to, instinctively lowering weapons near certain configurations, offering ritualistic gestures before others. Neurological conditioning, he realized. They've engineered their entire society around response patterns, triggered by specific visual stimuli. This discovery proved crucial when he was brought before the camp's religious authority, a withered pincer elder, whose body bore so many ritual scars that little original skin remained visible. The elder subjected Riv to what appeared to be a religious assessment, presenting various bone artifacts and studying his reactions. Drawing on his observations, Riv mimicked the appropriate responses: reverence toward ancestral symbols, aversion to those representing impurity. His performance convinced the elder that he might be suitable for conversion rather than immediate sacrifice, earning him the limited freedom that would make his plan possible. The human shows potential for enlightenment, the elder pronounced to the assembled warriors. He shall witness the ceremonies before his testing. This designation allowed Riv to observe 3 complete ritual cycles, during which he mapped the camp's complete defensive arrangements and identified critical weaknesses in their supposedly impenetrable religious authority structure. Most significantly, he discovered the purpose of the massive bone formations surrounding the central arena. These structures weren't merely decorative or symbolic, they functioned as acoustic amplifiers, designed to channel sound in specific patterns during ceremonies. The pincers had inadvertently created a sophisticated acoustic network that, with proper calibration, could be weaponized against them. On the third night, when brought to offer respects at the ancestral bone shrine, Riv carefully modified several key symbols using metal fragments concealed in his clothing. The changes were subtle, barely perceptible individually, but collectively designed to transform devotional patterns into blasphemous configurations when viewed from specific angles under ceremonial lighting. Symbolic subversion complete, he noted mentally. Psychological foundation undermined. His next task involved creating the acoustic disruption device from salvaged transport wreckage. The crashed Alliance vessel contained standard emergency beacons, whose transmission components could be repurposed. Working during brief, unsupervised periods, Riv constructed a device calibrated to emit specific frequencies that would interact with the natural resonance patterns of the rock formations surrounding the camp. Frequency modulation set to exploit structural weaknesses, he confirmed, after testing a miniature version in his cage. Secondary harmonic patterns aligned with Spidra Ursus mating season calls. The final component involved the ceremonial bone horn, an instrument traditionally used during rituals to ward off evil spirits. Through careful modification of its internal chambers, Riv altered its acoustic properties to generate dual-frequency outputs. One, audible to humans that would seem like traditional pincer ancestral calls. Another, in ultrasonic ranges specifically designed to attract predator species from surrounding territories. By the time Sar arrived as an additional captive, all elements of his plan were in position. Her presence complicated matters slightly, but ultimately provided the additional variable needed to create maximum disruption. "They expect us to fight each other," he explained, when they finally had a moment to speak privately. That expectation creates the perfect opportunity to trigger systematic collapse. Sar initially doubted his assessment, her military training emphasizing direct action over psychological warfare. "You're suggesting we can defeat an entire warrior society through what triggering superstitions?" "Not superstitions," Riv corrected. "Conditioned neurological responses embedded through generational indoctrination. The pincers aren't simply religious zealots, they've engineered their entire social structure around stimulus response patterns. Break those patterns catastrophically, and the entire system collapses." Though skeptical, Sar recognized the logic behind his approach. Her combat experience had shown that even the most disciplined warriors could be rendered ineffective if their fundamental assumptions were suddenly invalidated. The pincers, with their absolute reliance on ritual and pattern, might indeed prove catastrophically vulnerable to the right kind of systemic shock. "If you're wrong, we die," she pointed out. Riv nodded calmly. "If I'm right, an entire warrior culture that has resisted conventional military approaches for decades will disintegrate in minutes. The strategic value justifies the risk." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of guards announcing the ceremonial preparations. As they were separated again, Sar found herself reluctantly admiring Riv's methodical approach. While her training emphasized adaptability in combat, his focused on identifying and exploiting fundamental vulnerabilities in entire systems. Both approaches had merit, but in their current circumstances, his might proved more valuable. The morning of the scheduled combat arrived with blood-red sunlight filtering through perpetual dust clouds. Pincer warriors gathered in ceremonial formation around the arena, their movements perfectly synchronized according to ancient patterns. Drummers established the ritual rhythm that would pace the ceremony, each beat corresponding to specific movements from participants. Sar and Riv were brought forth separately, positioned at opposite ends of the circular depression. The chieftain ascended the war altar, his massive frame silhouetted against the crimson sky. In one hand, he held the ceremonial staff of judgment. In the other, a ritual blade carved from the tooth of some massive predator. "The ancestors demand proof of worthiness," he proclaimed in the formal ceremonial language. "Combat reveals truth beyond deception. Blood confirms dedication." As he spoke, Riv activated the first stage of his plan. The subtle vibration device attached to the cliff face began emitting its calibrated frequencies, creating microfractures throughout the rock structure. To untrained observers, nothing appeared amiss. But Sar, with her enhanced sensory modifications, detected the almost subliminal humming beneath the ceremonial drums. The chieftain raised his staff, signaling the commencement of combat. Guards moved forward to provide ritual weapons blunted, but still potentially lethal in the hands of trained fighters. Sar accepted hers with appropriate ceremony, noting that Riv deliberately fumbled his, creating momentary confusion that allowed him to retrieve the modified bone horn concealed in his clothing. "Remember the pattern," he murmured as they were positioned for combat. "Northern exposure first, then western collapse, southern penetration last." Before Sar could respond, the ceremonial drums reached their crescendo. The chieftain brought down his staff, officially commencing the death duel. Instead of advancing toward Sar as expected, Riv raised the bone horn to his lips and blew a complex series of notes that mimicked traditional pincer ancestral calls, but contained subtle distortions designed to trigger confusion. The effect was immediate. Warriors in the northern section faltered mid-movement, their conditioned responses conflicting with the unexpected variations. As they hesitated, firelight from the ceremonial torches illuminated the modified bone carvings Riv had prepared days earlier. The combined visual and auditory disruption triggered the predicted psychological crisis, warriors suddenly perceiving blasphemous configurations where sacred symbols should appear. "Desecration!" shouted one warrior, pointing toward the bone shrine. "The ancestors withdraw their blessing." Panic spread through the northern contingent as warriors began accusing each other of spiritual corruption. Ceremonial weapons turned against former comrades as the rigid hierarchical structure collapsed into chaotic infighting. Simultaneously, the vibrational device reached critical frequency, destabilizing the western cliff face where a significant portion of the pincer forces had positioned themselves for optimal viewing. The ground beneath them literally dissolved as microfractures connected, creating sinkholes that swallowed warriors mid-stride. Those who avoided falling found themselves disoriented and separated from their command structure, their weapons scattered across suddenly unstable terrain. From the southern approach, attracted by the ultrasonic component of Riv's modified horn call, came the Spidra Ursus exactly as he had calculated. The massive predators, driven by biological imperatives they couldn't resist, charged directly into the already disrupted pincer defensive line. Chitinous limbs tore through ceremonial bone armor with horrifying efficiency, creating a wave of terror that completed the systematic collapse of pincer military discipline. In the center of this orchestrated chaos, the chieftain descended from his crumbling altar, rage overriding his ceremonial composure. He charged toward Riv, correctly identifying him as the source of the disruption. Sar intercepted, blocking the first massive blow with her ceremonial weapon. The impact nearly shattered her already injured ribs, but her enhanced physiology allowed her to maintain defensive position. "Pattern breach confirmed," Riv called out, continuing his systematic triggering of prearranged disruptive elements. Final phase initiating. The vibration device reached maximum output, focusing its energy on the structural weak points of the war altar itself. Ancient stone, already stressed by centuries of erosion and recent modifications, began to fracture visibly. The chieftain, hearing the ominous cracking behind him, hesitated for a crucial moment. Sar seized the opportunity, channeling all her remaining strength into a precise strike against the junction between the chieftain's ceremonial armor plates. Her blunted weapon shouldn't have penetrated, but the resonance frequencies had weakened the molecular bonds in the bone armor, creating unexpected vulnerability. The chieftain fell to his knees as the war altar collapsed completely, its massive weight crushing those warriors who had sought shelter behind its supposedly sacred protection. The centerpiece of Pincer's spiritual authority disintegrated into rubble, taking with it the foundation of their cultural identity. In the chaotic aftermath, surviving Pincer warriors fled in all directions, abandoning weapons, ceremonial positions, and wounded comrades alike. Their society, built entirely around precise patterns and unwavering discipline, had no protocols for total systemic failure. Individual survival instincts overrode generations of conditioning, resulting in complete dissolution of their fighting force. Alliance rebel guerrillas, monitoring from beyond detection range, recognized the opportunity created by Riv's strategy. Their stealth craft descended through the dust clouds, deploying extraction teams to locate and recover the Alliance assets. Combat specialists moved efficiently through the devastation, securing Sar and Riv while establishing defensive perimeters against potential counterattack. "Extraction complete," reported the team leader as they boarded the vessel. "Hostile force neutralized. Casualty assessment indicates approximately 80% enemy losses, with 0 Alliance casualties." As medical personnel attended to their injuries, Sar found herself re-evaluating everything she had witnessed. Traditional military doctrine would have required a full battalion with air support to achieve comparable results against the Pincer Brigade, likely resulting in significant Alliance casualties. Riv had accomplished the same outcome through careful observation and targeted disruption of fundamental patterns. "How did you know it would work?" she asked, as their wounds were treated aboard the extraction vessel. "The precision required to trigger cascading system failure seems impossible to calculate." Riv winced as medics stabilized his injured shoulder. "Every system contains its own destruction, if you understand its foundational patterns," he explained. The Pincers built their entire society on rigid adherence to specific stimuli and responses. That rigidity created predictability, and predictability created vulnerability. Could the same approach work against alliance systems? She asked, suddenly concerned about the broader implications. His expression grew serious. Any system built on unexamined assumptions contains similar vulnerabilities. The difference lies in adaptability. Societies that can question fundamental patterns survive disruption. Those that cannot collapse. As the extraction vessel departed Morvek Prime's atmosphere, they watched the red planet receding through the observation portal. Below them, dust storms already began erasing evidence of the pincer encampment, nature reclaiming territory that had been contested by intelligent species for generations. What happens to them now? Sar wondered aloud. We've effectively destroyed their cultural foundation. Can they rebuild from that? That depends on whether any survivors recognize the lesson, Riv replied thoughtfully. Rigid adherence to pattern without understanding creates fatal vulnerability. Adaptation requires comprehension, not mere obedience. His words carried implications beyond their immediate situation, suggesting principles applicable to alliance strategies throughout contested territories. If patterns could be weaponized against adversaries, they could also be identified and strengthened within friendly systems to prevent similar exploitation. The medical officer interrupted their conversation, administering sedatives to facilitate healing. As consciousness began to fade, Sar reached across the space between their medical couches, briefly grasping Riv's hand. "We survived," she murmured. "But survival isn't enough. We need to build something better from this understanding." His fingers tightened momentarily around hers. "Patterns can create or destroy," he agreed, his voice growing distant as the medication took effect. "Our responsibility lies in choosing which outcome we engineer." As they drifted into medically induced sleep, the extraction vessel accelerated toward Alliance space, carrying not just 2 recovered assets, but potentially revolutionary strategic insights that might transform the nature of interstellar conflict resolution. Behind them, Morvek Prime continued its eternal rotation, indifferent to the rise and fall of civilizations upon its dust-covered surface. 3 months after the Morvek Prime incident, Sar found herself stationed at Alliance Strategic Command on Hilo Station. Her injuries had healed completely, thanks to advanced medical protocols. But the psychological impact of witnessing an entire civilization's collapse lingered in her dreams. She had been reassigned from frontline combat operations to strategic assessment, a promotion in title, but one that kept her far from active engagement. Riv had disappeared almost immediately upon their return to Alliance space, whisked away by Intelligence Division for extensive debriefing. Rumors suggested he now worked directly with the Strategic Patterns Analysis Unit, applying his methodologies to other conflict zones throughout Alliance territory. Their paths crossed unexpectedly during a high-level briefing regarding expansion initiatives in the Outer Rim territories. Sar had been tasked with assessing potential military resistance from indigenous populations, while Riv apparently served as consultant on non-violent integration strategies. "Captain," he acknowledged with a slight nod as they encountered each other in the briefing room anteroom. He looked different, more formal in Alliance diplomatic attire, the calculating intensity of his gaze now tempered with something resembling wisdom. "Engineer Harrow," she replied, surprised by the surge of emotion his presence triggered. "I hadn't expected to see you in strategic planning circles." A small smile crossed his features. The Morvek approach proved sufficiently effective to warrant broader application. The Alliance prefers systematic integration to extended military campaigns when possible. Before they could continue their conversation, senior officials arrived, directing all participants to their designated positions. Throughout the briefing, Sar found herself studying Riv's contributions with professional interest. His analysis consistently emphasized understanding indigenous cultural patterns before attempting integration, identifying potential points of resonance rather than vulnerability. After the formal proceedings concluded, they found themselves alone in the observation dome that crowned Hilo Station. Below them, the gas giant Theros rotated slowly, its swirling atmosphere creating patterns of hypnotic complexity. "You've changed your approach," Sar observed, gesturing toward the briefing materials he carried. "Your recommendations emphasize preservation, rather than exploitation of cultural patterns." Riv nodded, his gaze following the atmospheric currents below. "Morvek taught me that destruction, while occasionally necessary, creates vacuum, rather than resolution. True strategic advantage comes from understanding patterns deeply enough to harmonize with them, rather than merely disrupting them. The Alliance seems to have embraced your methodology," she noted. "Intelligence reports indicate decreased resistance in 3 sectors, where your recommendations were implemented. Pattern recognition works in both directions," he explained. "When we demonstrate understanding of indigenous cultural foundations rather than merely imposing our own, integration occurs naturally. The pincer case represented exceptional circumstances, requiring exceptional measures." Sar considered his words carefully. "Yet you haven't abandoned the capacity for disruption if necessary." His expression grew serious. "Every system contains potential for both harmony and dissolution. Responsible strategy requires understanding both aspects, while preferring the former." Their conversation shifted to more immediate matters: upcoming assignments, changes in Alliance expansion protocols, mutual acquaintances from previous operations. Yet, beneath the professional exchange lay deeper currents of shared experience that had fundamentally altered them both. As station lighting dimmed to simulate evening, Sar finally addressed the question that had lingered since their rescue from Morvek Prime. "Do you regret what happened there?" she asked directly. "The complete dissolution of their society wasn't our original objective." Riv considered her question thoughtfully. "I regret the necessity, not the outcome," he finally replied. "The pincer system was fundamentally incompatible with coexistence, built entirely on expansion through conquest and ritualized dominance. Their pattern guaranteed eventual conflict on a much larger scale. Yet we effectively destroyed thousands of years of cultural development in a single operation," she pressed. "No," he corrected gently. "We exposed fatal contradictions that already existed within their system. The survivors now have opportunity to construct something more sustainable from the fragments if they choose wisdom over mere reconstruction of the same vulnerabilities." Recent intelligence reports supported his assessment. Surviving pincer groups had fractured into smaller communities, many abandoning the rigid hierarchical structures that had defined their previous society. Some had even initiated cautious contact with Alliance outposts, seeking technological exchange rather than conflict. "And what about us?" Sar asked, the question emerging before she could reconsider. "What patterns are we establishing in the aftermath?" Riv turned from the observation window to face her directly. The calculating coldness she had first observed in him had evolved into something more complex, analytical precision, balanced with genuine connection. "That," he suggested with unexpected warmth, "depends on whether we approach relationship as strategic necessity or potential harmony." Sar found herself smiling despite the seriousness of their conversation. "Perhaps both simultaneously. The most effective strategies often serve multiple objectives." As they stood together, watching Theros rotate beneath them, patterns forming and dissolving in its atmospheric dance, they recognized a shared understanding that transcended their professional roles. The patterns they had identified and exploited on Morvek Prime had irrevocably altered their own perceptual frameworks, creating possibilities neither had anticipated. "I've been assigned to lead cultural integration efforts in the Nerid Expanse," Riv mentioned casually. "The indigenous populations there demonstrate fascinating adaptive patterns that might benefit Alliance expansion methodologies. The mission requires both strategic analysis and frontline diplomatic protection." Sar recognized the implicit invitation. "Coincidentally, my next rotation involves security assessment in precisely that sector. Perhaps coordination between our departments would enhance operational efficiency." Patterns of mutual reinforcement often produce optimal outcomes, he agreed, the hint of a smile suggesting he recognized the personal implications beneath their professional language. As station announcements indicated the approach of final shift change, they moved toward the exit together, their steps unconsciously falling into synchronized rhythm. Whatever patterns they would establish moving forward, they would do so with full awareness of both creative and destructive potential. A wisdom hard-earned through witnessing both sides of systematic transformation. Behind them, Theros continued its eternal rotation, atmospheric patterns constantly forming, dissolving, and reforming in endless variation, a visual reminder that even the most chaotic systems contained underlying order for those with perception to recognize it. "They've surrounded us, human," Sar had whispered, trembling, as pincer warriors encircled them. "Good," Riv had replied, with cold calculation. "Now I don't have to aim." Now, months later, those words carried different meaning. Sometimes being surrounded created not vulnerability, but possibility, the opportunity to affect systems from within, to transform, rather than merely survive. The patterns continued evolving, and they would evolve with them, carrying forward the knowledge that understanding ran deeper than exploitation, and creation proved more lasting than destruction.